Thanks for taking the time to be here with us. My first question for our distinguished panelists is, what are some of the tech sectors you're investing in now that may be overlooked by others? So just tell us all your secrets.
Well, let's see. So we have probably the most unusual investment that we have that would appear to be different, and this is always an interesting investment when I speak to people, particularly people who have background and experience in China, is we originated a company called Bolt Threads. Bolt Threads is a company that's invented to try to put the traditional silk business out of business. And if you're familiar with the concept of how silk is made, of course, it's made by silkworms. It's a very laborious process. It's very expensive. So silk is one of the most expensive products on the earth on a per pound basis. My partner Steve Basalo was doing research in an area that's very unusual for venture capital, which is how proteins are formed to make spider silk. So think of Spider-Man with the whole like zapping the thing and flying around. So he found two scientists. He literally looked all over the world because he had a thesis around this. He found two scientists in San Francisco who were doing work in this. When he went to their office on the first time, they had orb spiders. I hope nobody's afraid of spiders, but they had orb spiders. Orb spiders are about the size of my hand. And so the office was full of orb spiders. So as you walked around, you could just grab spider webs anytime you wanted because they had them all over the place. And what they were doing is they were hacking the genome for the spider silk, and they succeeded. So we led the Series A investment in that company. I think we put $4 million in for 35% of the company. And I can't remember the exact terms. They've gone through several rounds since then, and I think they're valued in somewhere between sort of $600 and $800 million now. So you guys don't know Bolt Threads, but if you worked at Nike or Smartwool or Lululemon or any of these other large companies, everybody is following Bolt Threads. Because if Bolt works, it will basically revolutionize the fabric industry in the same way that things like Gore-Tex and spandex and nylon did. So I'll start with that because I'm pretty sure nobody else is investing in spider silk.
You have to sell it to Spider-Man, too.
I gave you plenty of time to answers.
We have, let me focus on two sectors that are probably a little bit off the beaten path. One is, I think, agricultural technology is something that I think 3-4 years ago the VC industry wasn't looking at very closely. And today, we were seed investors and Series A and B investor of a company called Plenty. We make grow leafy vegetables on a vertical plane and at the factory level. So everything is indoors. We use LED instead of the sunlight. And we use machine learning to get the growth as fast as possible. So normally, in a normal land space, it takes about 1 or 2 cycles a year for food. In Plenty's case, it can do 12 times a year. So in the land space of a goal in a soccer field, you can create as much plants, and whether it's lettuce or strawberries, as much as a whole entire soccer field. And what's neat is this is all done indoors. The economics are about parity to making vegetables in the land, and it's getting better and better each day because LED is getting cheaper, and the learning curve is just getting better and better. So it's a major project because not only can you create these fresh vegetables at distribution centers all over the U.S., it's also a very national concern for many sovereign states. So for countries like Saudi Arabia that imports 99% of their greens, to be able to build it all by themselves, and for them, energy is cheap. So it's going to really revolutionize the industry as we see it. The other sector is the cannabis industry. I think a lot of venture capital firms many of them are actually prohibited from investing in this sector. And then the other half tends to be a little bit shy from the industry because of all the ramifications. But as you know, California passed the recreational marijuana use that starts January 1. And of course, medicinal use has been legal in California for many, many years. So we invested in a company called Ease.com, which is now the largest distributor of medicinal marijuana in actually the whole nation. And all the users are medicinal users. It's doing over $100 million in revenue already. And they'll be expanding, outside of the Bay Area as the year turns next year. But what's very interesting about this industry is that it is one of the fastest growing industries, and some people consider it controversial. We do not. If you actually look at the pattern of how gay marriage has been legalized over the years, which states were the first one that legalized gay marriage, and then over time it became federally okay. The cannabis industry legalization follows almost the exact same pattern. It's just about 10 to 15 years behind the gay marriage pattern. The states that allowed it, the pace at which the states are legalizing one by one, and so it's a industry that's to be reckoned with over the next decade.
If you have any people in your life who live here in Northern California who are in their early 20s and you care to ask them if they have Ease on their phone. And you'll find that actually a pretty large proportion of them do.
Thank you guys so much. It's super interesting. My next question is about AI. As I'm sure everyone here knows, it's emerged as such an important technology with many broad applications. And it's attracted lots of interest from private investors. It's also attracting increasing interest from governments in the US and China, partially due to its national security applications. And I'm wondering how that government interest affects the cycle of innovation in AI.
Can you repeat the second half of the question?
Yeah, I'm wondering how US and Chinese government interest in AI is affecting the cycle of innovation in that technology.
Yeah, so let me start talking about AI. First of all, we jokingly tell our companies, just put AI in the presentation and your valuation will go up by 30%. I think that's how crazy it's been, this whole AI movement.
But in 2 years, we're going to tell them not to use AI in their presentation. Just be aware of that.
That's exactly right. It's certainly a buzzword, and I think it's certainly overused. Even if a company just uses machine learning just to analyze their customer database, they're saying we're using AI to do X, Y, and Z. I think there's no question that both U.S. and China, the AI investments have been extremely abundant over the last year. I do think that where policy kicks in, to answer Kate's question, is recently I think Trump blocked the sale of Lattice computers. And I think, typically semiconductors, encryption, security are the ones that usually get blocked. But I do think in the next cycle, AI will be blocked as well, largely because the proprietariness of AI technology actually has a tremendous impact on policies. For example, if you use autonomous cars, how do you program whether if it's about to hit two cars, do you swerve to hit the car that has fewer passengers or more passengers? And these are all going to be, moral code is going to be coded in the software. Each country is going to have different policies. And they don't want, like China is not going to want a U.S. culturally driven, policies AI system, and vice versa. And so I think there's going to be a delineation by nation. But having said that, those are kind of the life and death situations. But I think in general, for most software companies, et cetera, AI is, it's just another technology that, as Paul said, it's likely going to be commoditized in the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think, so I have a few vectors into the AI experience, and I'm older, so maybe some of this will be new to some people. But so my first vector is I accidentally made a movie a few years ago called Something Ventured. It's about the origins of the venture capital industry and the origins of the Silicon Valley. AI goes back decades in some form or another. The notion of trying to program machines for machine learning goes back decades. Second vector for me is that my first startup was a company called Pure Software. We made a product called Purify. So if there are any C programmers in the room, you probably used Purify at some point. I met the entrepreneur who started that company. I met him in a hot tub at my girlfriend's house, and that's a whole different story. But we kind
of... This is how VC source deals.
Yeah. That's also in the movie Something Ventured. Don Valentine talks about how he basically got Atari done in a hot tub. So, but at any rate, I met this guy, and he was an AI programmer. He actually worked at a company called Symbolic, which was kind of a big company back in the day. He was a Lisp programmer. So he took the principles of Lisp programming and applied them to C++ and came up with this product called Purify, which was literally 100 times better at finding errors in code. So his name is Reed Hastings. And so we started this company, Pure Software, back in the early 90s. And he was, one of the smartest software developers I'd ever known. We took that company public using the principles behind AI to do that. And then later he started this little company, Netflix, that that actually worked out pretty well, and we ended up as investors there. But the interesting thing to me about the AI wave is back then, in the late 80s and early 90s, which is when Reed was an AI programmer, everybody thought that was going to be the big wave. And if you've ever been a surfer, when you surf, you look out and maybe, half a kilometer out, you see something that looks like a big wave, and then by the time it gets to you, it's not a very big wave. This time, it's a big wave. Like this time, it's actually happening, and we're creating new companies. And so at Foundation, the third vector and final vector on this is that we have 3 companies I'd highlight quickly. One is a company called Cerebras, which, if it works, it's a whole chip and subsystem company run by a really smart guy named Andrew Feldman. If this works, it will allow the programming of AI and machine learning to run at roughly 1,000 times current speeds. And that company, we did the seed investment, we shared it with Benchmark, and then now I think they just did a very kind of sparkly late-stage round. A second company worth noting is a company called GraphCore, which is out of Bristol, England, a company we've been in for quite some time that kind of morphed over into the space. And if they work, they'll be an interesting company sort of threatening some of the things that are happening in GPUs with NVIDIA. And then the final one is a company called Respond Software, and my CEO at Respond, I just got off the phone with him. He was on CNBC up until about 10 minutes ago, responding to the SEC hack. And what Respond is doing is applying AI to the SOC, so the Security Operations Center. So notionally, if we could, around at least the US, we need about 1 million more workers in security, trained workers in security right now. The need is that great. And what Respond has done is they've created a robot that helps satisfy about 90% of that need. And we just launched that company about 3 weeks ago, and that's why he's on TV today talking about that. His name is Mike Armistead. He ran security at HP for the last 5 years. And after I met this guy, Reed, in the hot tub, he hired me to join him at Pure Software, and then I met Mike Armistead at a party, and then Reed hired this guy, Mike Armistead, to be the product manager. So Mike and I grew up together 25 years ago at our first startup, and then he was my first EIR at Foundation 15 years ago, and now here it is, he's back, and we funded this company with him. So I think the AI wave at this point is actually quite real. To answer your question specifically, I don't think governments have any significant impact one way or the other. The need within private industry is so great. Government will lag as it typically does.
Okay, thanks. So, David, you touched on autonomous cars a bit in your response to the previous question. I wanted to get into a little bit more detail on that because, yes, there's a lot of competition between the US and China and other markets to innovate in autonomous cars. And I'm wondering if you foresee, many market winners in this space or just a few. How do you see that shaping up? Who's going to kind of win the race to dominate that technology?
I think it's going to be a very interesting market because I think it's not just autonomous cars. There's another underlying revolution going on, which is going from gas cars to electric cars. And if you combine the two, what you're going to start seeing is a whole generation of probably new auto manufacturers. Now, we shouldn't even call them auto manufacturers. Basically, you can make an electric car with autonomous features just like Dell used to put PCs together. And Dell revolutionized the PC business. So you're going to have tons of new brands coming out over the next decade. Now, in addition to this, you have the ride-sharing guys who are also going to go full force into autonomous. And then you have the incumbents. And then, of course, China is the wild, wild west where, there are clones of Tesla popping up. And then you have the ride-sharing like Didi, who's also going to get into this business. And so it's going to be a major battlefield. I mean, it's going to be very similar to, in the turn of the century, not this century, but the last century, when, U.S. used to have 100 car companies. And, of course, now there's only 3 or 4 major ones. And, 96, 97 of them all died or got merged. And I think something like that will likely happen in China. I think there's going to be tons of electric cars companies with autonomous features. Now, autonomous in specific, there are different levels of autonomous car driving. There's level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. Current Tesla cars are arguably level 2 or 3. The pure autonomous is really level 5. And I think what you're going to see is level 3 and 4 technology companies come out. And what's really neat about this is even the ones that are leading in China, the R&D team is actually, many of them are in Silicon Valley. You take NIO or Pony and all these guys, the R&D is done in the Valley. So what's really exciting for me is that this industry is actually going to be probably one of the very first where cross-border companies are going to shine. You combine the manufacturing capabilities of China, the R&D in the U.S., and to build a car, you have to really own it end to end. Now, will there be companies that will create components like Intel did for the PC industry? Yes, there will be. And then there will be guys who do the whole thing. But I just think that it's an area that VCs are going to be jumping into. Many of these crazy prices are happening in autonomous, but it's just going to continue.
Just briefly on that, because I think that was a way more complete answer. David knows a lot more about this than I do, I can tell. Just 2 comments. One, I was a real bear on the notion of autonomous cars. I'm 56, so I would tell people that not in my lifetime are you going to see really broad-based use of autonomous cars. And then I bought a Model X from Tesla, and then I started to kind of hang out with more people that were using this car. And there's for some people, a frightening number of people who commute up and down 280 every day, and they're not paying attention one bit to what's going on the road. They're reading their homework, they're working on documents, they're doing other things. They get on the freeway, they hit auto, and then when they get to their exit, they turn it off and they get off and go. It's that good. So I think that David's right about this. I think it's going to be very exciting. The other thing I'd just throw in the mix, just to make it even more complicated, in my opinion, I'm now a real bull on drone taxis. There's a company called Joby down in the mountains, down in Bonnie Doon, which is a place I'm pretty sure most of you will never get to, which is down near Santa Cruz. And they've been developing this drone taxi, and it works. It's going to be, I think within 5 years, if you've ever done that horrible trip between Manhattan and JFK, or if you do the horrible trip between here and San Jose, I think within 5 years there are going to be drone taxis that are going to be actually working, and that we're going to be using them on kind of a regular basis. That'll pick us up and take us over all this traffic and get us to our destination. So I think it's a very, very exciting area.
I think recently we saw 2 autonomous airplane companies, just kind of like the drone idea. And, maybe we're too old now to just even think, why would I ever go in an airplane with there's no pilots? But I think for the next generation, the millennials in particular, the people's behavior has completely changed, right? I mean, just 5 years ago, you could not imagine a female person just getting into some stranger's Prius to get a ride. And if you think about that, now the behavior has completely changed. That's normal now. Whether it's a Lyft driver or Uber driver, they're getting into strangers' cars and just being very comfortable. And so I think, the world's going to change. A lot of the transportation is going to probably really go autonomous over the next 10 years, and we have to be prepared for it.
Thank you both very much. David, I know you have to leave at 10, and it's I think 2 minutes to 10, so I think we should wrap it up here. And thank you all so much for your attention. Appreciate it.